Hey guys, welcome back to Radical Living podcast, and we hope you've enjoyed all of our previous episodes, and we hope that you enjoyed this one. To finish off Mental Health Awareness Month, I recorded this episode via Zoom with Howard Beverland, where we chat all things football and mental health. Howard informed me that he is a Newcastle supporter, which wasn't the worst answer that I've received. Still on the search for an Arsenal supporter, but we will get there eventually. Howard informed me that his football career started in schools, playing with friends, which led to youth football involved with Ballymoney and South Belfast. He then played in the Foyle Cup and competed in the Milk Cup 4 times, which then led to a very successful time at Coleraine, which then later he went to Crusaders, where he competed in the Europa League and Champions League, and now he is back at Coleraine. He also informed me that some of the best players he has played against were Man United players. We pick up this conversation with Howard, where I've asked him to explain what he does, because he is more than just football. And I just want to remind you before we jump into this podcast that you are more than what you do. Your worth is not in that. Your worth is in so much more. So guys, we hope that you enjoy this episode, and we hope that you're challenged by what Howard has to say, and that you get some practical tips from this week's episode.
Sure. So I graduated back in 2013 as a social worker. Spent my first few years working in a family support and intervention team. So that was kind of community work with families, going out to houses, child protection stuff, really. So yeah, like a lot of, probably looking back, a lot of difficult things to deal with in that space. Things were very challenging as well. But I kind of then moved on from there, and where I'm currently at now is in CAMS in the Northern Trust. So CAMS stands for Child Adolescents Mental Health Services. So we're kind of the main frontline mental health service for young people in Northern Ireland within the Northern Trust area.
That's kind of then your main focus at the minute. That's what you're working on.
Yeah, so that's where I've been now just over a year. Kind of within our service, we're working with young people and families as well, because we work with young people, but you have to do it within, I suppose, their environment and their systems. So within the family, it's important. So that often involves kind of working with parents as well. And that's looking at, young people's mental health, their emotional well-being, behavioural concerns or issues as well, and kind of helping them to, I suppose, a greater level of functioning. I suppose being able to manage their mental health, and I suppose seeing some improvement and progress for them as well, that I suppose it betters the quality of life that they have as well. And I suppose it just helps them just to have a better all-round level of mental health.
Brilliant. I think it's an amazing work, and we're gonna really dive into that in a little second, and just the relationship between mental health and sport. But I ask every guest that I have on the podcast this question, and quite interested to see what your answer is going to be. But what does radical mean to you, or what is your understanding or definition of it?
So for me, when I think of radical, I feel it's it's standing for something. I think for being radical, I think for me, the first thing you have to ask is, what are you being radical for? Because you can be radical for a number of causes out there that is detrimental to society, to people, to people's lives, and we know many radicals out there that is on that line, really. So it's kind of asking, I suppose, what you're being radical for. What's the purpose behind it? So is it to, I suppose, benefit others? Would be obviously a good motivation. But for me, I think radical means living outside of the comfort zone. Okay, I think to be radical, it's a sense of not settling, and I think often that means living in the uncomfortable sometimes. So probably not settling for comfort, or living outside of the comfort zone.
Yeah, I love that answer. And I think just what you said there, often I would think, as well, radicals being outside of what it's outside of the norm or your usual routine, but there's a little bit of tension in that there. But that tension leads to growth. Really interesting. In regards, Howard, to mental health, it's always been around. So it's been prevalent for so many years and throughout history. But probably more so in um this decade, or these last number of years, it's became prevalent, and especially whenever this pandemic has came around in COVID-19. So how, thinking about football and exercise, how does that help mental health, and does it, is it a benefit, is it beneficial?
Yeah, I think sport, not even sport, exercise as well. I
Yeah.
think it's good for mental health. All the research and evidence out there support that, and
Mm.
even looking at it from brain side of things, and we talk about releasing endorphins, those kind of feel good,
Yeah.
um, that feel good factor in our mind. You go and do a workout, and you could be completely wrecked after it, but you feel good.
Yeah.
I think you feel that you've done something it's been good, it's wholesome, it's benefited you, it's good for your body. So there's a sense of having achieved and done something that actually is a good thing, and that's rewarding, I think, as well. So there's a sense where it's
Yeah.
good for self-esteem and confidence as well. It's good for exercise, good for reducing anxiety, increasing mood. Ultimately, I suppose, in helping sleep as well, which is a massive
Hmm.
factor in mental health well-being. So it's really good for that. I think as well it's good because if you look at particularly team sports or the likes of CrossFit, where there's a really strong sense of team
Yeah.
aspect, a real strong sense of community, it allows somebody to be part of something,
Hmm.
outside of themselves, and that's a good thing too. It creates a sense of belonging to something. Your gym, as we'll talk about, that we go to, or the team that we play for. Very quick, we'll talk about my team or my gym, so there's a
Yeah.
sense of kind of ownership, I think, around that too. Through you're part of something and you've been accepted into that too. So I think those are important factors whenever it comes into just well-being in general.
Yeah.
But it's good for, yeah, I think it's good for all those things. It's good for a sense of, social aspect as well. Look,
Hmm.
meeting people, talking to people. I think that's important aspects. Having fun, laughing, but focusing on something that has rewards at the end of the day. That there's
Yeah.
something to gain from it. It's hard work, be reward kind of system, and I think those are all really important things around exercise, and sport as well.
Yeah. I think just even like throughout the pandemic, and a lot of us have been in a lockdown or have been in our houses more than we would like. But even going out for a walk, it just allows you to clear your head and just come back and think about maybe something that you were overwhelmed by. It just helps you to come back and rationalize it almost. So it definitely like
Mhm.
helps massively across the board. But thinking about back to just you and your career, Howard, and um, what have been some of your own struggles mentally, especially playing at elite level, and having, like, I would assume there's added pressure at that level you're playing at, maybe by your peers or by yourself. And as your career has gone on, how have you managed that better, or grown in that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's probably I find as my career has gone on, as I've got older, you expect that it gets easier because you have all this experience, you've been there, you've done those things, you've played in
Hmm.
big games as well. But I look back and think, those earlier years, late teens, early 20s, mid 20s, for me was probably much easier. You weren't really conscious of, you were thinking about preparing well, but you weren't thinking probably a lot of the mental aspect of the game as well,
Yeah.
because there's a sense of you were just young,
Eager.
highly motivated. You were just wanting to go out there and play. Yeah, you were just eager to get out. You had no real, you know, too many fears. You just kind of got on with it, and away you went. But I think as sort of career progresses, I think as well, because in society and social media, it's much more. There's a greater awareness of mental preparation of the game. I think for years we've been really good at that physical preparation or training. Your gym work, recovery, all those aspects. But I think the mental side of the game has the awareness around it, and the importance has increased much more.
Yeah.
So, I think within sport, I think the two most challenging places to be in is when you're either injured or when you're not being selected. So you're not in the manager's plans really, or you're
Mm.
not kind of making the team, you're on the bench, or maybe you're not even making the kind of the match day squad. So I think in regards to testing of your own mind and resilience, I think those two spaces are incredibly challenging as well. So I think I found in my own career, whenever you're playing, like I remember speaking to a player, an experienced player one day, and he said, for a manager, you've got to focus on, not as much as your starting 11, but your players who aren't playing.
Yeah.
Because I think when you're playing, when you're in the team, there's momentum. You just kind of continue on. You play. You don't think much about it. You're just looking to the next game. But I think if you're a player who maybe isn't playing or injured, I think those are the players that you probably have to pay most attention to, because they're not being selected, or they're injured and they're maybe in a difficult place because the road back to recovery is long. So I think for me, looking at my own career, probably being in either two of those spaces, which thankfully in the whole, looking back in my career, there hasn't been too many times. But in those moments, I think it's most challenging. So I think as well, I think because sports pressure, and with pressure comes, stress, comes kind of anxiety, and then with that, it kind of triggers negative thoughts in your own head. And I think it's about, over time, for me, it's been about, I suppose, realizing that those thoughts are not uncommon. I think it's part of feeling under pressure, but I think it's learning how to cope with them, and strategies to use maybe that allows you to, yes, feel a wee bit anxious before a big game, but be able to manage that and kind of controlling your thoughts. I think often, an experience for many sports people is, visualization really. I think whenever you kind of building up to a big game, you're a little bit anxious, you can very easily, your thoughts can lead towards, maybe a game in the past where you didn't play well, where, that you made a mistake, or whenever your game wasn't you weren't on top of it. So I think it's kind of managing those thoughts, visualizing a game where you did do really well, where, you won your headers, you made your tackles, you passed the ball well, looking at those games, and kind of visualizing that too. But I think, it's within sport as well. I think you need to be very aware of your support systems around you. I think you have to be very aware of who you choose to listen to, what voices you're listening to, I suppose, kind of what you're reading, whether that be on social media as well, because it's, sport is a moment of highs and lows. It's a minute of being, everybody's favorite, to all of a sudden sometimes, no longer being criticized, maybe, those things, at times where you're playing well, people within the media, people are keen to talk to you. Other times when you're not, your phone's quiet, so it's a sense of a real kind of roller coaster of, people hold you high, and then at other times, I think as well, you can sort of feel the lows as well. So I think in that case, you need to be aware of your support system. You need to be aware of, I suppose, who's with you on the journey, that's wanting to encourage you. I suppose not reading things, not listening to negativity, or people who would, question maybe your ability, question your performances as well. Because I think your most, I know for me, your biggest critic is yourself. Your biggest critic is your inner thoughts. So it's about being aware, I suppose, of kind of what you're listening to, information that you're taking on board. And I think it's about, realizing that, football's a game of opinions. People will have opinions, that's okay, but generally the people who have all opinions know the least. For the sense of the players, the manager, the coaches, we know what happens in the Tuesday, Thursday training nights, what happens in a match day, within the changing room, all these kind of things, that we hold the information about. I think people from outside are, make judgments based on the least information. So I think there's a sense of, you're just kind of managing that, being aware of that. I think I remember a player who always said, about in the wins, don't get too high, and the defeats, don't allow yourself to become too low. You kind of want to manage that kind of middle ground of saying, great, enjoyed that, did well, but we'll kind of look on to the next game really as well. So it's kind of like, I think a lot of humility as well goes a long way.
You're obviously, your faith helps a lot with your job and playing and handling things, but how does that help you mentally?
I think faith for me, and faith in Jesus, has been something that I've came to, I suppose, have for myself really, or that's when the kind of an encounter came where I would say that that was a real moment where I began and where I kind of placed my faith in Christ really came at the age of 15. So that's kind of where it began, that journey, if you like to describe it, that I've been on, that I continue to be on as well, where you're living your life for in a way that would honor Christ, that would reflect him to others around you as well. So that's massive for me. Faith, I suppose, for me isn't just I suppose an added-on compartment of life on top of other responsibilities and requirements as well. It really is the focal point. It's what I hold as central really to if you like the source or the core, to which everything else kind of orbits around then as well, or comes from, flows out of. How that, I suppose, affects my thinking, my mind, mental health, all those things. I think it's great because people will have their views on the Bible and whether they choose to believe it or not. But I look at it and I think it's incredible because it answers questions that we that nowhere else holds the answer for. I think it deals with eternity as well, which is massive. It answers questions of life now, life before we were born, and life after we die as well. And it deals with, I suppose, the big question of having being accepted by God and right standing before him, and the opportunity to be found in him, and to come to know him in a personal way through, I suppose, the forgiveness of our sin as well. So that's massive, and I think that's the number one most important thing in life is having right standing before God and knowing that you're accepted in him and loved by him as well. But from that, I guess the Bible, I think for me, it talks about the spiritual, it talks about our soul, but it's very holistic. So I think it talks and covers so much about the well-being, the human flourishing of human beings. And I think the number one starting point is knowing God and having a personal relationship with him. But the Bible also talks about lots of other things. It talks about our mind, our emotional well-being, really good practices as well. Like I think in shops now it's ruled with self-help books as well, and 7 steps to a happy life. But really, I think if you dig deep into the Bible, I think it holds all those answers long before these books were being produced as well, because it talks about the importance of silence and solitude, and talks about the importance to have a connection with nature as well, to go for a walk, to look at nature, the stars, to see, to behold all those things as well. It talks about, I think, having a focus, it talks about being still, and it talks about, disciplining our body, talking about, good choices. It talks about wisdom, making good choices in life that ultimately would lead to, I suppose, better mental health, because, poor mental health sometimes can and not always can come from certain choices we make that kind of takes us down a path of what's going to be detrimental to our well-being, whether that's drugs, alcohol abuse, violence, whatever that might be. So it talks about kind of the flourishing really, and I think particularly it talks about focus, which is massive as well. We've talked about that already, about what we focus on, and obviously the Bible talks about fixing our eyes upon Jesus, the Bible as well. But it talks about, I guess, the renewing of our mind as well, because I think there's a sense where we will experience pressure, we'll experience stress, we'll experience negativity, people being critical, we'll experience harsh words, we'll experience people who try to run us down. There's a sense of, as I say, the pressure, the anxiety. So therefore we need to manage our mind. And the Bible talks about renewing our mind, which basically means reading the Word of God that's in the Bible. So that's huge when we talk about mentally looking after our mind as well. I think there's there's nothing like it whenever you sit down with time and space and quietness and you just begin to read through some of the Psalms. You begin to read through some of the Gospels, whatever it is. When you open the book, it's an amazing sense of perspective. All of a sudden you realize that the problems you hold and the things that you're being stressed about, considering those before God through his word, doesn't mean that they don't matter. It doesn't mean that they're not important, but it just means that actually in the grand scale of society and before a big God, the issues, we can work with them, we can sort them, we'll get there. But it just kind of shrinks it down a little bit, which is
Yeah.
important, because in our head the stress is massive, and life's about to crumble. But when we kind of come before God, it just realizes that, it's, this life isn't really just about us. There's something much more and bigger than ourselves. And our issues are significant, they're important, but I think it allows us to kind of view them in perspective.
How would you say then your faith and experience, how would you say that helps you help maybe your teammates, especially younger guys who are just new to this, are starting out and playing? Can you help them manage their mental health a little bit better? Can you give a faith
Mm.
perspective?
I think, you want to be a good representation of Christ. I think you want to reflect him in many ways. It's important that you're not being for standing for good, and for, showing the fruits of the Spirit, for being compassionate, being kind, being considerate of others as well, having time for others. I think that's massive. I think in this day and age, it's crazy just how people just don't have time for each other. And I think,
Yeah.
often we're focused on where we want to get to and what we want to achieve. And I think particularly within sport, because you're trying to manage your own mind, you're trying to manage your own motivation and work ethic as well, that, I think to consider others is something you have to consciously do, because I think often your mind can just be focused on you and what you need to do to benefit you and to get you in the team and to improve your performance. So I think it's important to be aware and considerate of others. I think it's part of good leadership as well. I think it's a part of being a team player, which are massive, and things I hold in high regard. And it's with being about it. We've kind of all been in situations where maybe we haven't had a good game the week before, maybe the team has been beat. So you're kind of just much more aware in those times of players and kind of being down, and you're down yourself. But I think it's a great way of dealing with that, is to kind of check out how your teammates doing as well. I think that's important, because it takes your mind off how you're doing and kind of consider it towards others as well. So
Yeah, brilliant. Just going into the last real question I have for you, Howard, and it goes back to what you described radical as. Something that you said then was it's not allowing yourself to settle. So my question for you is, how would you encourage? We've talked about encouragement and the power of encouragement. For anybody that's listening to this, how would you encourage them to be radical, and what you explained in your definition of it?
sure, you're looking at, I suppose, for me, and something I listened to a long time ago, is asking yourself the question, what you're passionate for. I think that's massive.
Yeah.
Because if you can find what you're passionate for, you'll also find the motivation, the desire as well, which is massive to be radical, because there's going to be moments where even you're doing something that you love, you're still going to face moments where you resent it, at moments where actually at times you think, I'd just rather do something else right now. So I think you have to find something that you're passionate about, because you need that strength and that kind of commitment to it whenever the times are tough as well. So asking yourself what you're passionate for, what you're gifted at. I think we can't be passionate about things that maybe we're not gifted at, and maybe we don't have the out and out ability to. So I think it's asking yourself, where does your passion lie, where does your ability and your gift lie in something as well. So I think that's a good question, a couple of good questions to ask, and to begin with. I think alongside that, you have to be aware that along the road, there'll be people who will encourage you towards that, but there'll be people who'll try and maybe criticize, or there'll be times when people will kind of convince you, I don't think you should do that, it hasn't worked out very well. So I think it's being aware that you're going to meet both those kinds of people on the road as well.
Yeah.
It's important to choose which one you kind of listen to as well. I think you're going to have moments where, again, you're going to be living a radical life. Like you're managing your thoughts around, can I do this? Is this? I think you're going to experience a battle of settling for comfort and settling for something that feels much more easier and nicer, and doing something or doing very little that you're not experiencing those thoughts and that kind of sense of pressure as well. But I think you have to be aware that where there's something to be gained, there's going to be it's going to demand a lot from you as well. I think it's about, I think you can, if you go alone, I remember this saying one time, if you go alone, you can go fast, but if you go together, you go longer,
Yeah.
as well. So it's looking at the people you surround yourself with, because it's never just a lone journey. You need people along with you to do that, to help you, a sense of being accountable, to increase that motivation and that encouragement along the way. So you're kind of looking to surround yourself with people, whether that's family, friends,
Yeah.
teammates, are going to encourage you along the way. And I think it's about realizing, like, I remember a time I was listening to something that Carl Frampton said one time. He says, "I love boxing, but he says sometimes I hate it." And I think as well, and I can only, from a sports perspective, there's times where maybe you're injured. There's times where your fitness is well off, and you feel it, and you know that you're not up there, and it feels long. The road feels long as well. So there's a sense sometimes where there can be that battle. But I think yeah, I think that's when people around you, it's important, as well. I think it's important when to talk to some of those negative thoughts that you get sometimes as well,
Yeah.
to separate what's fact, what's just opinion, what's real, what's based on reality, what's not as well, along the way. So I think, yeah, I suppose living radically, that would be a few things that I'd maybe put out there to think about, to consider. And I think probably the final thing is the purpose of why you do it as well. I think that's massive.
Yeah.
Um, what is it, or why is it you want to live radically for this cause? What's the cause? Who does it
Mm-hmm.
benefit? Is it, for yourself? Is it for more money in the bank only, or is there maybe something much more impactful about it? So it's ultimately thinking about the purpose behind it as well, and why you're doing it, and who it's going to benefit.
Yeah, some really thought-provoking statements in there, and just what you were saying about how it's a constant battle between
Mm.
being comfortable and being uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think, we think of doing something we're passionate about. It can feel, as be great. You'll not feel like you're working a day in your life. You feel that,
Yeah.
you'll just get up every morning. You'll swing your legs out of bed, and you'll be up, 2 hours before work. You'll be buzzing. You'll be, everything will just be so easy. But I don't know. In my experience, um, it is sometimes more of a battle. It
Mm-hmm.
can be. I think as well, when you're performing under pressure and there's expectations as well, I think that increases sort of the pressure that surrounds it too, and managing the stress and all. But I think sometimes you do have to, that kind of just those inner thoughts, managing your own mind, your mental health as
Yeah.
well, your physical health too, your emotional health, which is probably actually another area
Mm-hmm.
that we lag behind on, maybe even more than mental health, is talking about our
Yeah.
feelings as well. So I think that's a key component,
Mm-hmm.
and for well-being as well, to talk about feelings, to recognize feelings as well, both positive and negative too.
Yeah, absolutely. Really, really insightful, and hopefully anybody that's listening to this will just be encouraged. And I think it's good that we've spoke about the reality of it, in the sense that it won't always be easy, and it won't always
Mm.
be you're on this
Yeah,
high. I think it's good that we've spoke about that, to expect some lows, and to expect that it's
yeah,
going to feel like that sometimes.
yeah. Because I think if you read any kind of sports people, or people who have maybe achieved lots of things in life, like, failure is massive.
Yeah.
Failure is, something that the best experience. But if you listen to everybody who talks about it, it's something that, and
Yeah.
sometimes we kind of want to take a stand for something, and I suppose, you want to try and avoid failure. Obviously, you want to be, I suppose, successful and achieve a lot, but it's being understanding and realistic that there will be times along the way that we could call failure, of not achieving our goals as well. But I think it's once one person said, failure doesn't have to be final, as well.
Yeah.
So there's a great sense of that, and there's a great sense of, you're only ever one decision away from a comeback as well. So out of those
Yeah.
times can come great times ahead. So yeah, I think it's important to be real about it, because people's expectations, it's important to, because you chase after something, or if you want to live a radical life, and certainly 2 months in, all of a sudden you're like, this feels just not as easy, or this isn't just going as
Yeah.
well as I expected that this would go. All of a sudden somebody could, they could say, well, look, that's not for me, or I'm going to yeah, about living radically as well. But I think it's a sensible, yeah, maybe you have to take the rough to the smooth as well, and perseverance, I think, is massive in
Yeah.
it.
Guys, we hope that you enjoyed our conversation with Howard Beverland. Howard, massive thank you to yourself for recording this episode with me. You can find Howard on Instagram and Facebook, and make sure to check in with how his ongoing career is with Coleraine Football Club. Just a reminder, if you haven't already, please leave a comment or a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify and YouTube, and please make sure to like, subscribe, follow and share Radical Living Podcast with all of your friends, your family and people that you work with, people that you know. And we want to get as many people listening to this podcast, and we want to encourage people and challenge people to make that everyday choice to be radical. So guys, we hope you enjoyed this conversation, and we will see you soon with a brand new episode.